Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in AP English, and we turn now in our study of the Odyssey to book 5, what is called in our by our translation, Fagel's, Odysseus, Nymph and Shipwreck, okay? Now, just to remind, so that way you have in your notes a sense of where we have been and where we're going. Books 1 through 4 of the Odyssey, as we have said, and we've covered already, the Telemachus. They tell that story of the young son of Odysseus, Telemachus, coming to manhood. Athena tells him you have to grow up and all of that. Books 5 through 8, we begin that section now with this lecture, is Odysseus first with Calypso on her island and then with the Phaeacians. Books 9 through 12, as we've said already, those are important books because they tell the flashback of where Odysseus has been before he ends up on the island with Calypso. And then finally, books 13 through 24, that's Odysseus' return to Ithaca, and of course we have all kinds of suitors getting jacked and the like. Now, just to remind, if you haven't been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, find the AP folder and find our prior lectures. Let's just review where we've been. In book 1, we've got the invocation of the Muse. We have Athena dressed up as Metis, having her conversation with Telemachus on Ithaca, giving Telemachus his mission at line 340 of book 1. You got to grow up, she says, right? We learn, of course, that Odysseus is a man of twists and turns. We just don't see Odysseus yet. In book 2, we have Telemachus calling the assembly. He is mocked. We have the sign of the two eagles fighting, which is interpreted as Odysseus is definitely coming back. And then Telemachus will leave with Mentor, actually it's Athena, to go in search of news of his father. In book 3, he first of all shows up at Pylos, where he will talk with Nestor and try and gain some information. There, Athena will change into an eagle, and immediately Nestor will tell Telemachus, "You have good luck, my boy." He will leave with Nestor's son, Pisistratus, and the two of them will then run and get off to go and visit Menelaus. Book 4, that's the book we just finished. Book 4 is Telemachus with Menelaus and Helen on the island of Sparta. She will, in that famous scene, she will drug them. We have those very interesting Odyssey stories. Stories about Odysseus there at the walls of Troy. And finally, we're told that Menelaus, through Proteus, will get the information that Odysseus is alive. He's on an island with some goddess, and as well, we will find ourselves then back with the suitors at the end of book 4, who are laying wait for Telemachus, and as well, we know that Penelope finds out that her boy is gone, and she's beside herself with worry. We now turn to book 5. And let's do a quick summary before we get into our lines, all right? But before we get there, let's remind ourselves of what the hope is. The hope is that you're doing your own reading and you're using me then as a guide, right? We are always going to mention our learning theory, that desire for us to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. We do this through our 3 levels of reading, or our annotative approach. At level 1, what does the text say? At level 2, what does the text mean? At 2A, themes, messages. At 2B, the rhetorical study, not what Homer says, but how Homer says it. We're focusing on symbolism and irony, and we're going to see quite a bit in book 5 of this. And then finally at level 3, how can I relate this information to other things I already know, and then finally to myself personally. When we are working at 3A, relating to other texts, we begin with the Iliad, because obviously we've done our close study of the Iliad. And then finally, we try and own the text, right, at each of these books. Can I ask some questions of myself that somehow help me remember what's going on? Okay, let's jump now to a brief review of book 5. We are on Mount Olympus. Again, Athena will come to Zeus and say it's time. Zeus will say the power is yours, Athena. Do as you wish. Hermes is sent to Calypso. And on Calypso's island then, she knows Hermes immediately. She says, I'll do anything you want, until she finds out that in fact Hermes is there to say it's time. Your love toy has got to go back home. Calypso is really upset but finally says, okay. We catch our first sight of Odysseus at line 170. And Calypso then will speak with Odysseus and say, it's time for you to go home, and I'll help you. Odysseus immediately, this is such an insight, immediately, he doesn't believe her. Odysseus, forever the skeptic. Liars can't trust anyone else, in other words. Odysseus is a great liar, so he doesn't trust her, right? She promises. We're told that she smiles at him, right? And she says, I am all compassion. You can appreciate the irony of this one, right? He's been stuck here for 7 years with this drop-dead gorgeous woman, having to make love to her, okay? But he's ready to go home. She asks him, is Penelope better looking than me? He's very intelligent in his response. Odysseus will say, no, but she is my girl, and I want to get back to Ithaca, right? She helps him build a ship, raft, and off he goes. Next part of this book is Poseidon will see Odysseus really upset. First sight of Odysseus at line 310. He's mad that the gods have decided to change their mind. Odysseus speaks out loud to himself. Put it in your notes. This speaking out loud, this self-talk is something we're going to see a lot of Odysseus doing. And he will even say that he's a wretched, wretched man and his cup of pain is really full at line 330. He says it. It would have been better to die at Troy, at least like Achilles, and be a hero, than to die out here in the middle of the ocean. We'll be reminded, of course, of Achilles having his fight against the river, right? Xanthus, Zamanther, and Scamander, and here we'll have the same game being played with Odysseus fighting against the waves and the like, right? Without help, he would drown. I know a nymph will give him a scarf, think of it as a life raft, okay, or a life buoy or whatever, and she'll save him. For 3 days, Odysseus will swim in the ocean. Finally, he sees the land of the Phaeacians, and there at line 515, he will say it out loud, that he is a man of misery, and what is next? Is this the end? Always he's kind of asking, is this the end of it for me, right? He buries himself under some leaves and sleeps. We have this remarkable epic simile at the end of book 5 that you want to look forward to. He's like a man who is burying a glowing coal or brand to keep the spark alive, telling us, of course, that Odysseus is soon. I mean, he would die here pretty quickly if he didn't find land. Our first observations of Odysseus, by the way, before we turn to lines to study, he is distrustful, very skeptical, right? Much like Telemachus, he is kind of a skeptic. Remember, Telemachus is the same way. He's kind of a whiner as well, but maybe he has good cause. I mean, it's not like he hasn't had a few things they have to deal with. Let's turn now to the opening lines. We sometimes like to look at opening lines of these books just to see how the poet Homer kind of sets us up. We are with Athena on Mount Olympus, line 4 and following. Athena will begin. Recalling Odysseus to their thoughts, the goddess deeply moved by the man's long ordeal, held captive still in the nymph Calypso's house. And she speaks, Father Zeus, you and other happy gods who never die, never let any sceptred king be kind and gentle now, not with all his heart, or set his mind on justice. No, let him be cruel and always practice outrage. We'll think of Plato's book 8-9 of Republic and the tyrannical ruler, and she's speaking obviously ironically. In other words, since you're not going to help Odysseus, then it might as well be the case that all men be wretched and bad. Think, she says, no one of the people whom Odysseus rules remembers Odysseus now, that godlike man, and kindly as a father to his children. Well, a couple of observations here. Whether Odysseus was kind as a ruler or not is a subject of always some debate. We'll get to that one at the end of the Odyssey, right? But the idea that he's already forgotten will remind us of Tennyson at 3A's, Tennyson's Ulysses, when he in fact will say, I have become a name, right? And nobody remembers me anymore. So here he is. He is in fact forgotten. Now, she continues, he's left to pine on an island, racked with grief, in the nymph Calypso's house. She holds him there by force. He has no way to voyage home to his own native land, no trim ships in reach, no crew to ply the oars, and send him scudding over the seas brought back. Remember, all of his sailors are dead because they ate of the forbidden meat of Apollo on Apollo's island. And now his dear son, Telemachus. They plot to kill the boy on his way back home. Yes, he sailed off for news of his father, holy Pylos, first, and then on out to Sparta, right? Zeus will say, my child, at line 27. My child, Zeus, who marshals the thunderbolts, replied, what nonsense you let slip between your teeth. The exact same thing that Athena said, by the way, to Telemachus earlier. Come now, wasn't the plan your own? You conceived it yourself. Odysseus shall return and pay the traitors back. Telemachus, sail him home with your skill. The power is yours, no doubt. It's interesting that here Zeus will say to Athena, you have all the power you want. We will see indulgent fathers towards their daughters in the next book. When we see Alcyoneus, the king of the Phaeacians, with his daughter Nausicaa, same game being played here. Home to his native country all unharmed, while the suitors lump to port defeated, baffled men. With these words, Zeus turns to Hermes and says, You're our messenger. Announce to the nymph with lovely braids our fixed decree. Odysseus journeys home. The exile must return. But not in the convoy of the gods or mortal men. No, on a lashed makeshift raft and wrung with pains. On the 20th day he'll make his landfall. In other words, Zeus wants to be sure that he will have some kind of challenge on his way home still. The idea of him landing then on the island of the Phaeacians is very quickly about Zeus is going to have challenges all the way. The irony is that, we're told, Zeus will say, the Phaeacians will show great xenia, right? That is to say, hospitality. They will send him home. And the irony of all ironies will be, for that, they will be punished by Poseidon and, quite frankly, by Zeus as well. This will lead to all kinds of interesting discussion points as we get into that conversation at the end of the Odyssey. Well, we have then the first sighting and mention of Odysseus. When Hermes shows up, he's blown away by how amazing Calypso's island is, right? And at line 88 or so, we're told Calypso, luscious goddess, knew Hermes at once, as soon as he saw his features face to face. And then we're told that immortals are never strangers to each other, no matter how distant one may make her home. As for great Odysseus, and this is our first reference to Odysseus, Hermes couldn't find him within the cave. Off he set, on a headland, weeping there as always, wrenching his heart with sobs and groans and anguish, gazing out over the barren sea through blinding tears. Scholars from the very beginning have pointed out that Odysseus, this man of twists and turns, this man of action, when we meet him for the first time, he's paralyzed. He can't move. Probably the worst imaginable thing for an active person is to have to sit and do nothing, right? Students said to me the other day, Odysseus could never be a couch potato. He's forced to be a couch potato. He hates it, doesn't like it at all, even if it's with the drop-dead gorgeous goddess who has given him the opportunity of immortality. He's got no interest in it. Well, Hermes shows up, speaks with Calypso, and says now at line 128, now Zeus commands you to send him off, Odysseus, with all good speed. It's not his fate to die here, far from his own people. Destiny still ordains that he shall see his loved ones reach his high-roofed house, his native land at last. We're told, though, that the lustrous Calypso shudders at these words and bursts into a flight of indignation. We think of Hera in the Iliad, several times showing this level of indignation. She says it, hard-hearted you are, you gods, you unrivaled lords of jealousy, scandalized when goddesses sleep with mortals openly, even when one has made the man her husband. And then she goes into a little story hour about how it's interesting. Zeus can hanky-panky with anybody and nobody seems to care. But let a goddess hanky-panky with a mortal man and all of a sudden the gods get very, very offended by this kind of thing. Well, she continues after she's thrown her little fit at line 155 and she says, let the man go if the Almighty insists, commands, and destroy himself on the barren salt sea. I'll send him off, but not with any escort. I have no ships in reach, no crew to ply the oars. In other words, I can't help him. However, she does say, ironically, at line 158, I'll hide nothing so he can reach his native home. Right? Hermes comes back one more time and says, release him at once. Steer clear of the rage of Zeus. That word rage takes us back to the Iliad, doesn't it? Or, down the years he'll fume and make your life a hell. We know this from our study of the Iliad. When Zeus makes these threats, he means them, right? In other words, he rules through that iron fist when he needs to. With that, Hermes leaves, and we're told that Calypso goes to find Odysseus. And we're going to get our first sight of Odysseus now at line 167 or so. She finds Odysseus there on the headland, like we were saying, sitting still, weeping his eyes never dry, his sweet life flowing away with the tears he wept for his foiled journey home, since the nymph no longer pleased. This is interesting, a little aside there. The nymph no longer pleased, in other words, seems to suggest when Odysseus first arrived on the island of Calypso, he had no problem with sleeping with her, but he's now been 7 years, and he's ready to go. He's kind of tired of her, right? In the nights, true, we're told, he'd sleep with Calypso in the arching cave. He had no choice. Back to the blame game again, right? He had no choice. Unwilling lover aside, lover all too willingly. In other words, she wants to be with him. He doesn't necessarily want to be with her. Some of this is the setup, obviously, because at the very end of the poem, guess what the first question is that he asked Penelope? You're right. You're right. Did you sleep with anybody, right? Because I kill you if you did. In other words, he didn't really want to sleep with Calypso, and of course earlier it was Circe, right? He didn't want to sleep with these women. He just has to. But all his days he'd sit on the rocks and beaches, wrenching his heart with sobs and groans and anguish, gazing out over the barren sea through blinding tears. So, coming up to him now, Calypso says, "No need, my unlucky one." Notice it's fascinating. She calls him unlucky. "To grieve here any longer. No, don't waste your life away." Earlier we were told his sweet life flowing away. "Now I am willing, heart and soul, to send you off at last. Come, take bronze tools, cut your lengthy timbers, make them into a broad-beamed raft. Off you go," right? And she says, "I myself will even stock your raft with food. If only the gods," she says, "are willing, home you will go. They're stronger than I to plan and drive things home." So in other words, the gods have willed that it's time for you to go. We're told at line 190. This is crucial to understand the character of Odysseus. Long-enduring Odysseus shuddered at that and broke out in a sharp flight of protest. "Passage home? Never. Surely you're plotting something else, goddess, urging me in a raft to cross the ocean's mighty gulfs, so vast, so full of danger, not even deep-sea ships can make it through, swift as they are and buoyed up by the winds of Zeus himself. I won't set a foot on a raft until you show good faith, until you consent to swear, goddess, a binding oath, you'll never plot some new intrigue to harm me." So in other words, it says a lot about Odysseus. He is the skeptic, the eternal skeptic. He is always asking, are you trying to mess with me? And he says, until you vow, I'm not going to believe a word you say. He was so intense, we're told, that the lustrous goddess smiled. We think about Achilles in his famous smile of Iliad 23, when we had that whole exchange between Menelaus and Nestor's boy, and we're told when Alcyoneus says, "Yeah, no, I ain't giving up my prize," that Odysseus smiled. Here, smile. In other words, when a god or goddess, or in the case of Achilles, recognizes something they respect, they smile. Doesn't happen often, but here it happens. "What a wicked man you are," she says, "and never at a loss. What a thing to imagine. What a thing to say. Earth be my witness now, the vaulting sky above. I swear," she says, "that I will never harm you. All I have in mind and devised for you are the very plans I'd fashion for myself if I were in your straits. My every impulse bends to what is right." She says it, "I am all compassion." Well, there's irony upon irony here that she's all compassion because she's forced to, right? She was going to keep him for the rest of his life. And now she will help him build his boat. But she gives him a word of caution at line 223, 224, 225 and following. She says, "But if you only knew deep down what pains are fated to fill your cup before you reach that shore." This idea of the cup of pain, we're going to come back to it. We're going to hear it mentioned a number of times, right? The 23rd Psalm says, "My cup runneth over." But the understanding there is with blessings. Here, when the cup runs over, the cup is filled with pain, right? Lots of pain, suffering, before you reach that shore, right? She says, if you knew that, you'd stay right here, preside in our house with me, and be immortal. Much as you long to see your wife, the one you pine for all your days, and yet I must fight I just my claim to be nothing less than she, either in face nor figure. Hardly right is it for a mortal woman to rival a mortal goddess. How in build? Yeah, she asked about Penelope. How in beauty? In other words, you have a drop-dead gorgeous goddess asking, what is up with this Penelope that you so badly want to go? She's not a goddess. I'm a goddess. I'm drop-dead gorgeous. I'm a supermodel gorgeous. And she is clearly not, right? Well, Odysseus is in an interesting spot. I mean, if he upsets Calypso too much by saying, oh, no, my wife is way hotter than you, then obviously he's got problems. How will he respond? It's a brilliant work of rhetoric. Watch this. Ah, great goddess, worthy Odysseus answered. Don't be angry with me, please. All that you say is true, how well I know. Look at my wise Penelope. She falls far short of you, your beauty, stature. She's mortal after all, and you never age or die. In other words, you're better looking than my wife. He flatters Calypso. Nevertheless, I long, I pine all my days to travel home and see the dawn of my return. And if a god will wreck me yet again on the wide dark sea, I can bear that too, with a spirit tempered to endure. We immediately think of Nietzsche's famous Twilight of the Idols, the idea of, that which does not destroy me makes me stronger and all of that, right? Much have I suffered, labored long and hard by now in the waves and wars, and this to the total. Bring the trial on, he screams. Even as he spoke, right, we're told the sun set, the darkness swept the earth, and now, withdrawing into the cavern's deep recesses, long in each other's arms, they lost themselves in love. So in other words, one last time, Calypso gets to have sex with her toy, and then off Odysseus is ultimately going to go. He makes this raft with her help. It's outfitted in the light, and we're over to page line 310, and now we're told he's off riding on his raft when Poseidon sees him. God of the earthquake saw him just returning, Poseidon from Ethiopian lands, and he spies Odysseus, and he's enraged. Right? And he shakes his head and he rumbles to himself, outrageous. He says, look how the gods have changed their minds about Odysseus while I was off with my Ethiopians. Just look at him there, nearing Phaeacia's shores, where he's fated to escape his noose of pain that's held him until now. Still, he says, Poseidon, my hopes ride high. I'll give that man his swamping fill of trouble. And with that, we're told he rammed the clouds together, both hands, and he creates this huge storm. Right? Huge waves. Odysseus' knees quake, we're told, at line 328 or so, and then he will speak to himself. Now this soliloquizing to himself, and this is possibly where Shakespeare gets the idea, so many of those brilliant soliloquies of his plays. Here Odysseus is speaking out loud to himself, telling us how he feels. And it's anything but heroic. Wretched man, he says. What becomes of me now at last? I fear the nymph foretold it all too well on the high sea. She said, before I can reach my native land, I'll fill my cup of pain. And now look, it all comes to pass. What monstrous clouds King Zeus, crowning the whole wide heaven black, churning the seas in chaos, gales blasting, raging round my head from every quarter. My death plunge in a flash, it's certain now. In other words, it's time.